If we want to just go back to the core question of who should be using AI, I don't know. And that's really why we need to go in, evaluate the situation, the vision statement, how successful we are on that vision, and see if increased data access and increased data processing can actually be transformative in some significant way.
My guest today is my co-host, Arpy Dragffy Guerrero. He is the founder of PH1 Research, where he's consulted companies like Spotify, Microsoft, Mozilla, the National Football League, and others to research and strategize how to best leverage emerging technologies. He's worked on products across AI, personalization, Web3, location sensing, and more. His focus is on creating product and testing strategies to quickly pinpoint where the best opportunities are for new product.
You need to remember that we're about 10 to 15 years into chatbots at this point. And if you went out and polled people, they hate them. So we need to imagine having agentic capabilities. The analogy is an agent on your behalf. A mortgage broker in this situation, they're there to make the process of buying a home easier, facilitate a speedier process, make sure that you understand what's coming in and out, and the same thing with a realtor. In this future, a financial services agent could build a financial plan based off the information that you have available. They could build budgeting for you. They can build forecasting.
Arpy maps out futures design, how to build AI products that customers want. We discuss strategies for product teams, like learning from failure and the struggles of early AI, the challenge of identifying the impactful use cases of AI, the importance of value drivers and why they are different than jobs to be done, applying systems thinking to AI products and strategies, why people hate chatbots, agents will open new possibilities, and examples of how agents could transform use cases and roles.
We need to examine what that customer journey looks like. We need to know where the breakdowns are happening, and we need to really start imagining what could be possible at some of these junctures that are happening, because we've been locked into these linear thinking models. My product usually had 5 scenarios in which it could be built for. In this new model with Gen AI and probabilistic models, you could end up with 1,000 scenarios.
Please remember to subscribe to Design of AI, the podcast for product teams on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Substack. We interview leaders and practitioners at the forefront of AI to help product teams navigate where and how to leverage AI. Today, we are flipping the script a little bit. So I am inviting Arpy Dragffy Guerrero, my co-host, as our guest today. I'm super excited. We have been working together for 9 years, and you've really honed your craft, especially around emerging technology and AI, doing strategic consulting. And I just am really excited for you to be able to share some of that knowledge, in particular about how do we make products or AI products that are really useful and valuable to customers. So, we started our first real AI project in 2016 for a resort technology company. What was it about getting to work on that type of a project that excited you enough to want to continue to build out your craft?
The show is hosted by
I'd love to say that it was exciting, but if we remember back to 2016, what happened was we were tasked with looking at a problem space in resorts and hospitality and facilities. There's a clear way that you can leverage the technology. There's some clear solutions that we can map out. We designed them. We started building partnerships, but the technology just wasn't there yet. So again, that was 2016, and we learned a lot of lessons. And I think those lessons still apply today. And it's funny looking back at that work, other projects. You and I did presentations about what AI is good and not good at. I remember we did one of those at Microsoft in like 2018 or 2019, where we played around with HoloLens. And the reality of it was that up until 2 years ago, AI was still just fancy machine learning, right?
But I remember that one of the frustrating things about doing that initial work in 2016, because there was so much of an education gap. Now we're in a really exciting time where that education gap has sort of closed, and people are so excited by the technology that we've almost kind of skipped ahead of needing to provide real valuable use cases. So since then, you've really focused on honing your craft in emerging technology in general. What is it that drew you to this type of work and this type of technology?
If anything, working on a project where it ultimately led to failure because the tech wasn't ready makes you want to get better at it, makes you want to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And you're more of a traditional mixed methods researcher. You're someone who likes to understand where you're going to end up. I'm someone who really is challenged by the idea of, well, how do we predict the future in some sense? And it's really painful. Since then, the whole idea of futurists has come to the map, futurist thinking, strategic foresight, all these sorts of things. But in the context of building product and building a business, need to start collecting signals and making some predictions. And that's why, we moved on from there. We did some work in machine learning. We did some work in analytics. We did work for Spotify. We did work in the Web3 space, some in like fintech. And the reality of it is that when we're exploring new technology, new capabilities, you need a whole different toolkit. And that toolkit's exciting. So the work we did with Spotify really is how could we change the entire space so that artists and managers and fans can interact in a different level. We did work with the NBA and NFL on similar things in terms of how you could change fandom. And those sorts of questions, they run like a stream through all these sorts of projects, which are ultimately like, if I put something completely different in your hand, how would you react? And the reality is a consumer really challenged by that. And that's why, as a practitioner in that space, you need to bring a different skill set to that table. And that's what's fun about it.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever met someone who's so excited to jump into just amorphous questions or things that don't really have a framework. You talk a lot about removing the guardrails of legacy products or having to kind of reimagine a product entirely. In the work that you do, in the writing that you do, you speak a lot about the need to find truly impactful use cases for AI rather than just exciting capabilities. What have you found are important factors that go into an impactful use case?
The reality of it is that we have yet to find strong, consistent, impactful use cases for AI. 2 days ago, I pushed out this article from Matt Webb where he mapped out and triangulated different types of products. You have your chatbots, your assistants, your agents, and then you have co-pilots in the middle. But a co-pilot is a bit of a cop out. It's intended to be like a unifying solution that does a bit of everything. It mimics humans, but it's anthropomorphizing the experience of being a technology. We haven't found the solution. Now, yesterday I wrote something about archetype.ai where it's trying to use data from AI or data to AI in a different way, where it's trying to collect it from a ton of sensors, it's trying to interpret and infer what's happening situational. It's situational logic. That is something that's impactful, but it requires us to really transform how we think about data processing. And that's one of the dilemmas is for the last 2, 3 years, yeah, ChatGPT has been on the scene and that's great. But we've all been too obsessed with the idea of very linear interfaces. We're still thinking of it from the perspective of deterministic application design, where you can understand where the outcomes are going to net out. We're thinking about it from this chat interface and prompts and such. But if we look 5 years in the future, it's very unlikely that that's how things will be utilized. It's either going to go down the route of something like Google Flights, which was one of our case studies a couple weeks ago, where the AI is kind of hidden in the background and it's there to simplify, regulate, activate parts of the experience, or it's going to go to something like we're talking about this archetype AI or medical applications where it's about really bringing together data sets in ways that previously had not been possible. So if we look ahead, finding use cases, that's really the hard part. And unfortunately, a lot of the AI products today are built off of intuition. And it makes sense, right? You have something like Intercom, they have a business that's built on years or decades at this point of knowledge that customer service is a clear use case. But then you have other ones who see an opportunity and assume that there's needs to be fixed. You can look at legacy things like a DocuSign, a very clear use case. But what's the next iteration of DocuSign? Is it just smarter contracting? Or is it to remove the need of contracting? We're really not sure at this point where the value is because the other part that has yet to be solved is who's going to pay the bill. We're seeing week by week that basically access to these AI tools is getting cheaper and cheaper, but that means that somebody is pushing off the cost. These tokens are getting cheaper and cheaper, but we know that the expense, we know the environmental impact keeps going up and up. So at some point, we need to find some weight of customer value. And in fairness, that hasn't been reached. And that's why there's more and more articles of AI startups losing their funding or having to cut back because they just haven't found product market fit in a significant way.
You mentioned about value, which, value drivers are probably the most important consideration when it comes to use cases. And I personally have talked a lot about that value exchange because in order for an AI system to work properly, people have to willingly participate in it and give it information, which Forrester is now trying to coin the term as zero party data. Can you talk a little bit about the value driver part of it and how companies can think about finding value drivers or value exchange for those use cases when they're talking to users or potential users?
I know that there's not a standard way of speaking about value and customer exchanges and such. So where I sit on this value driver component, and it comes from marketing. There's a reason someone uses your product. There's a reason why someone has a relationship with your business. We need to understand what that is. Now, product management has gotten really good. Research has gotten really good. The problem is because of the siloing of organizations, the ways that the remits are structured within corporations, everyone's focused on very granular conversions. The value of the ads product is some specific micro jobs to be done. But is that jobs to be done why someone uses your product? Probably not. Is the jobs to be done above that one probably why it uses? Even that is not the case. There's a value driver above all. And in the case of, let's say, like an Airbnb, why does someone use it? Is it the ease of booking? Is it finding cool places? Probably not really. It's in some respects, the value driver is either making travel affordable, it's making travel accessible, it's making travel something that's more universal for people who don't want to stay, in a 200 square foot room. That value driver is something that we lose sight of, and particularly researchers and product managers tend to lose sight of because of the way the remits are structured. So to find out that value driver, we really need to zoom back to what research and ad businesses used to be, which is understand the human condition. We need to do ethnography in a sense. We need to understand what and why the implications are on someone's life. In an episode we did with Jess Holbrook, who was head of UXR at Microsoft AI, he had this interesting perspective, which is we need to understand what the aspirational self of someone is. Who do they want to become? And how can the product enable them to become that aspirational self? That's what I call a value driver. Again, a lot of people have different terminology for it. The problem, though, is that UXR and product management has become so focused on pain points and needs that we forget that those are grains of salt in a beach of impact. And this is the hardest part about shifting product mentality towards this entire new data set that we have enabled with AI.
And just for anyone who hasn't listened to the Jess Holbrook episode, he was speaking quite a bit about how at Meta in particular, he had implemented participatory community research where everyone comes together to essentially create shared vision, values, and almost a charter for what AI should and shouldn't be, what should be an AI feature or not, things like that, which I think is really interesting and really speaks to the fact that as UX professionals, we really need to start looking outside of our current toolkit to find ways to build for AI versus traditional.
Something important there. What is the vision of a product? What is the vision of a business? What actually aligns all the groups? What is the holistic unifying entity? Even strategy is something we don't talk about very often. As these products and tools have really productized the act of doing work, we forget why we do the things we do. And vision is so critical. And it's one of the things I really preach with my clients, which is ultimately, why are we doing this? What are we trying to change in the ecosystem in which we're playing? What really is the end state that we're hoping to encourage and enable? And without that vision, you really can't do much else. But that's the problem, is AI requires us to go up the ladder. If you look at the way in which it's changing the future of work, it's forcing people to take on bigger and bigger challenges because the micro ones are going to get automated. And that's okay, but it requires you to take a mental model that looks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels up in the hierarchy tree. And ultimately, that means all of us becoming more equipped to think about strategy and having more of an impact and comprehension of the vision of an organization.
So my next question was going to be, when would you advise a client to build with AI versus a more traditional digital implementation? But maybe the better question is, how would you advise them to even understand or identify if they should be building AI versus a more traditional digital product or feature?
There's been a lot of hype about AI, and the only answer that is fair is no one needs to build with AI. Flat out, absolutely not. It's the same way that really a business's role should be to have the highest quality experience scaled out at the most reasonable and sustainable way possible. What that means is if I'm in healthcare, my job should be to ensure that every interaction is of the highest quality. If we do not have the resources or the capabilities to do that, then we leverage technology in the best way possible. So when we look at somebody like a telecom, and you and I worked on a couple telecom projects, telecom is one of these industries where there quite literally is an endless amount of demand for customer service and support and knowledge. This is when AI comes into play. When you literally cannot satisfy the need of consumers, that's when you can leverage it. Conversely, if we look at this archetype.ai product, it's when there's a gap in the service blueprint of what we're trying to achieve. One of the use cases that they're exploring is if we put sensors everywhere, and if you have situational logic that can infer what's happening based off of the data around that sensor, what are new use cases that we can solve for? One of those was around logistics. Let's say if a sensor detects a rapid shift in a logistics package, you can infer perhaps it's been dropped or something traumatic has happened to it. You can start some protocols about what may have to happen to secure that package or ensure that it's still in strong condition. That's a great situation to use AI, right? But if we want to just go back to the core question of who should be using I don't know. And that's really why we need to go in, really evaluate the situation, look at the vision statement, look at how successful we are on that vision statement, and see if increased data access and increased data processing can actually be transformative in some significant way. So if we look at banking, one of the things that's happened in personal banking in particular, there's been this rapid digital transformation. We're putting apps in everybody's hands. Everyone has websites, everyone has digital payments and such. Has it worked? Are people actually using those tools? Are they satisfied with those tools? Are we hitting the targets? Now, the problem with it is organizations like to look at data the way that suits them as best as possible, right? I might have 50% of my members downloading a banking app, but does it mean they're using it? Are they using it reluctantly? Are they satisfied in what they're doing? Are they still resulting in sustained high volumes going into in-branch and resulting in high expense centers? These are the sorts of things that a lot of groups aren't equipped or able to answer effectively. But if we investigate in a very focused manner, you can start answering these questions and you can start pinpointing a particular inflection point or a very specific pain point, and I really want to focus on that term, specific pain point that is causing negative feedback cycle around a situation.
It sounds like one of the challenges that you're articulating here is that oftentimes people are just sort of trying to replace traditional digital experiences with an AI implementation rather than looking for ways to leverage what it does best. And I sort of wonder, there are some use cases that, or some implementations that I think have been really strong. So, for example, in anywhere it's predictive and hyper personalized, so like in education technology, there are some new tools that are coming out where it is constantly trying to reassess and give students new resources that better align to where their knowledge gaps are, where their interests are, how they can learn better. And it's showing some really impressive results in student learning retention. Where we're looking at like how can you get ahead of what someone needs based on where they're at today or what's happening and how they interact with it. And I think that's where I personally see some really exciting uses of AI, where the technology and the reliance on that data is actually benefiting the end user.
100%. But we're still in the very early stages of AI, and in almost every startup, we're still stuck in the same core use cases. How can we use AI to better search, to better summarize, to better process? That's cool, but that's not revolutionary. That's ML, really, in many respects. It's not really a giant leap forward. So let's say if organization blows an entire war chest on that, what happens if 2 years from now, stronger use cases are determined and we've missed the boat and we actually just don't have the financing available to make those bets at that point? That's the real risk right now. Ultimately, what it means is that as an organization, we need to have a very clear understanding of what's driving our negative outcomes and your positive outcomes. It's the same thing as in a healthcare situation, right? If you have a patient, you need to focus either on the worst outcomes or the best outcomes and figure out which of those can be elevated and figure out which ones technology can lead to stronger outcomes. We spoke to Amy Bucher a couple of months ago, who is a PhD working on an AI for healthcare. And her focus is that basically AI enables for a much more effective processing of individualized circumstances to update and modify personalized treatment plans. Now, if we take that context and move it over to industry or commercial applications, the reality of it is that if we think about software, it had always been very deterministic. And as a result of deterministic, and that's defined as we can design what the inputs and outputs will be and what that journey would look like. You can make a clear customer journey. In this probabilistic model, we won't know and we should not infer what the stages are along that journey. We should build a system that enables them to off ramp that system into other systems, get back on it, and really modify their circumstances and their context as necessary. But what that means is that enables us to really nurture, develop, and manage scenarios on a bigger, grander scale for organizations. And that kind of thing can lead to some really fantastical parts. But the problem with that is it enables a whole new kind of product thinking because teams aren't equipped really necessarily to imagine, well, my product usually had 5 scenarios in which it could be built for. In this new model with Gen AI and probabilistic models, you could end up with 1,000 scenarios. You can't design for all those. Basically, we need to leverage AI in the most focused, structured, and quality assured situations. We need to leverage it in ways where we know that the outcomes will meet a certain fidelity, a certain quality, and a certain kind. If people can off ramp in too many ways, we start dealing with hallucinations, we start dealing with misinformation, we start dealing with systems that break down altogether. And that's the real danger right now. And that's why, when we talk to people at the front lines of building these products, almost always the conversation goes back to we started with this big idea and we have to trim it, trim it, trim it, trim it, trim it down all the way until we found it was actually valuable. And that really is the big lesson in this current evolution of this technology.
Thinking about the fact that AI is at its fundamental core very valuable from a back end and, you know, more of a technology that can power the tools that are being built. Should we be maybe looking at it not from a UX perspective, but from more of a systems thinking perspective? What's your thoughts on that?
Systems thinking is absolutely the right way to go about it. What we're dealing with is, again, having to zoom out. We've mastered UX, we've mastered a lot of web applications and mobile applications, but they're a snapshot on what your product can or should be doing, right? We know how to do those well at scale. But what we need to do now, and I mentioned it before, is we need to zoom out to the visions level. We need to examine what that customer journey looks like. We need to know where the breakdowns are happening. And we need to really start imagining. And I think imagining is a really fantastic way to think about it. What could be possible at some of these junctures that are happening? Because we've been locked into these linear thinking models of product. So where we go from that is then understanding some of the critical questions that enable effective AI product building. So we started off with this piece about we need to know what the core value drivers are. What are the positive and negative interactions that are driving the most value for a customer's desire to use that product? Then we need to define what the outcome should be. What type of outcome drives the most value and which dilute value. By understanding that, we can start really defining what those product experiences should or shouldn't be. Then the next really important thing is understanding value comprehension. So often we're seeing AI products getting launched where the value is incomprehensible. There is this expectation of value being delivered, but if a user doesn't understand it, then it doesn't matter. And this has come up like just recently. I finished an AI project for one of the big five, and the thing is they don't get the AI part of it. They like AI, but they don't get the AI. If they don't get it, then what's the point? You're investing, millions, if not billions, into this product. Yeah,
Just to clarify, the they means users, right? Like
yeah,
the
users.
customers.
If a
Yeah.
user doesn't understand the value being delivered at that point from this, so-called transformative technology, then it might as well just be ML or something traditional legacy interaction. Now, below value comprehension, you need to think about the interaction model. How is that value being delivered? How is it being showcased? Is it something that a user can comprehend? Is it something that offers a level of control and interoperability that they're comfortable with? And this is something we should come back to in terms of level of control. But then the last part here in terms of how to deliver an AI product that's effective is really the incumbent value. And this is, are they using something that's good enough? Do they even want to change? What is the value that that product delivers above all? And what do you need to displace so that there is some likelihood of a change behavior? Those really are like the five levels that I think of when I think about how to create an AI product that's effective and, you know, cognizant of the system in which it operates.
Yeah, so those are some fantastic and incredibly big questions, right? And so we've spoken with several different people on this podcast who touch on user research about some of their approaches to it, and you personally have conducted hundreds of user interviews particularly related to emerging tech projects. And we've said this many times here and in conversations with clients and just in general, but people are particularly bad at answering questions about something so new. So, what methods or approaches have you honed to get the best insights from emerging technology interviews to help answer some of those questions?
You know, Funny enough, I almost don't think that the user interview matters. And the reason I say this is I find most of the problems happen in the design of user research. Oftentimes, we're trying to force change upon users, and the user interviews are basically a theater stage to force that change upon them. But forcing change is the number one challenge with AI products. The technology does not necessitate that someone needs to change to your product. They don't need it at all. Like it's not necessary in any respect. But assuming that our organization is aligned and has a holistic view on where they want to get to, if they have a shared understanding, if they have a coherent and plausible and sustainable framework in which they're trying to build these products, then we can go into testing from the perspective of answering and going through that triage of questions that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, which to go back to that was like understanding core value drivers, outcome definition, value comprehension, interaction model, and incumbent value. So that type of research, it can start with something as simple as evaluating their legacy solution against competitors. Why are they using a legacy solution versus the competitors that are on market? Because you always are facing a competitor who can and likely is delivering more value than you. So why are they using that? What are the outcomes that are leading to the evaluation through which they decide to use this product versus another? Because again, there's likely a competitor out there who is more effective than you at such things. Now, what this results in is that you really need to think of it again from a system. And as a system, we need to go through that series of questions in a series of waves or sprints or whatever you call them. It means that you constantly need to be reframing the questions and possibilities, some design artifacts, but those design artifacts don't need to be comprehensive. They don't need to be fancy or anything like that. We just need to position them in a place where they can imagine what you're trying to explain to them. And the thing is, if you're unable to explain it to them, then it doesn't matter. And this is where the design comes into play. Again, it doesn't need to be a strong design artifact. It could be a co-creation session. It could be just moving blocks around. It could be wireframes. It could be storyboards. It doesn't matter what it is, but they need to understand the value you're delivering. They need to understand the outcomes you're proposing. And you need to find a way to extract a comprehension of what the value means to them and what the levers are to deliver that value.
I also think this is where academic and industry research will probably start to converge, because academic research has been working in this emerging tech space for a lot longer than most people in industry. And so I'm personally excited to see different, new, more innovative ways of trying to get some of these answers come out. For most people that are listening that don't know you really, and this is kind of their first chance to get to know you in any meaningful way, one thing about the way that you work, and something that I think has worked really well for you, but you are very honest. Let's just call it that you have a philosophy rooted in radical transparency, which means that you're very comfortable having uncomfortable conversations to course correct some clients, building AI products in particular. So I'm just going to assume that there are a lot of people out there who are being asked to create AI products or AI features without a real plan. What advice do you have for those teams, or how would you approach that kind of a conversation if you were being asked to do that?
That's a funny one. I know that you asked this question of Nick from Label Sessions a couple weeks ago, and we've also asked this of Scott Jensen. So you can go back to those episodes. They have some interesting ones. But the reality in terms of how I approach those things is if we can't do that foundational assessment of why people use a product, you're just wasting your money. And I would be the first to tell someone that. We can proceed to those next stages, but the further down that pipe you go, the more money you're burning. And it's starting to get exponential at a certain point, how much more money you're spending. So what do you do, right? Now, you can either go at it very directly and have those conversations, find some allies, and build a team in support of a different model of proceeding on those projects. Or conversely, what you do is you, as Nick so eloquently put it, you can be a pirate and embed some of the questions that you need answered into your work, have some Easter eggs in there, and basically at the delivery stage of whatever phase you're in, is you share some uncomfortable truths from the mouths of your users, sometimes from the mouths of your internal teams that you might have gathered through stakeholder research or facilitation. And sometimes these unsettling truths shift the model, they shift the perspective. It's the same thing in your family. If someone actually, for once, speaks out and tells the truth, it can really shock things, but that shock can save you millions of dollars. So sometimes you just need to bring proof to the table because one person's perspective isn't enough. And that's just the nature of this game. And that's why we're consultants, right? Our job is not to bring our opinion, or it's to basically build a case of some sort.
Great advice. And I think to add to that is one of the things that I think you've particularly been good at is building projects so that you have micro projects within it. So you have a lot of pivot points in case you need to. And I think that the nice thing about that is it also gives you those moments to be like, hey, we're going to do a check in and I'm going to share some uncomfortable truths with you if that is what needs to happen at that point. So you're doing it early and often rather than spending all of the time to get to a point of a big reveal and possibly causing some friction internally, or having, worst case scenario, having other teams already building something that it turns out might not be a good choice or a good fit. Let's talk about some more specific examples that exist in the world. So one of the newest, most buzzworthy things is Claude Sonnet 3.5. It's been getting a lot of attention lately because of their artifacts feature that they launched recently. Can you explain quickly what that is and why you believe it could be really important?
The Sonnet tool is the first instance of an LLM actually being assistive in a real significant way. Instead of just searching and summarizing and processing, which are those core use cases that LLMs have been built on thus far, and they're really boring for all intents and purposes. It's not much different than what Google's been capable of doing thus far. Sonnet is the first instance where it can make information comprehensible. It has situational context and awareness to package things into artifacts that you can use. So if we want to go back to, let's say, financial services as an example, if you think about the artifacts perspective, you could start having analogies that are a little different. So let's say traditionally a chatbot in the perspective of financial services had been there just to go back and forth and answer questions. Press one if you want support, press five if you want to talk about mortgages. In this perspective, the analogy could be that the chatbot is an agent on your behalf, and it's there to source and generate whatever you need and modify on your behalf. So think about a mortgage broker, right? A mortgage broker in this situation, they're there to make the process of buying home easier, facilitate a speedier process, make sure that you understand what's coming in and out, and the same thing with a realtor. In this future situation where you have a financial services uh, agent working for you, they could build a financial plan based off the information that you have available. They could build budgeting applications for you. They can build forecasting for you. They can take care of your contracting for you. They can send your banking information to specific contacts that you might have. There's a lot of things like that that it prospectively opens a door for, and that is immensely exciting because you need to remember that we're about 10 to 15 years into chatbots at this point. And I think if you went out and polled people, they hate them. They just hate chatbots. And I don't know who in their right mind would actually want to use a chatbot. They're pretty terrible. Let's remember that. They're based off the same technology as a phone automated system, and they've always been terrible. So we need to get to a new threshold of what they're capable of. And this is the first instance where you can imagine having agenic capabilities.
Yeah, and just super quick disclaimer, we are saying in no way that you should be using a GPT or LLM to share your banking information. Yeah, and I think there's some pretty exciting things happening. There's a group that's working on what's being called the guaranteed safe LLM or guaranteed safe process, where they're looking at creating essentially safe boxes where it creates gate stops in terms of potential security threats. Still early days. I think there's some exciting things that will happen in terms of being able to have more safe instances of using AI. So we'll keep ourselves posted on what happens with that. But I think that was a really great explanation of what Sonnet is working towards and working on. I think for product teams keeping tabs on everything that's happening and changing so quickly, that's probably a really exciting but equally so nerve-wracking prospect of having something that is very low cost, has a lot of functions and features that could potentially usurp what they're doing. Something like what Claude is doing with their artifacts feature could come across as being a bit threatening, but also really exciting to product teams today. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how should product teams be thinking about these new LLM features as they're rolling out?
I don't think teams should be intimidated by LLMs. In fairness, I think they're more analogous to like fiber optic cable that connects one continent to the other, or that's running between our houses and our streets, right? They're the pipes through which this technology and processing power are enabled. Yes, it's possible, obviously, that these LLMs will come and cannibalize your moat, but in fairness, They're the proof of concept for what you can do with your localized data set in a secure and protected manner. So again, if we go back to the financial services example, no, I don't want to share my banking information. No, I don't want to share my financial information. No, I don't want to share the information of my loved ones if I'm taking care of that. But if I am a large financial institution and if I were to develop a technology that's leveraging components of that or mimicking in some controlled, safe, regulated manner, then it makes all the sense in the world. Similarly, as we see constantly, if systems are too interconnected, it creates vulnerabilities and such. So we're going to start moving more and more towards the situation where organizations are going to have to build their own bespoke instances of LLMs or Gen AI tools that handle very specific micro requests. And that's part of this agentic kind of view or this RAG model or whatever you want to take from it, right? So there's going to be different architectures for different instances and different use cases. And if anything, this is all inspiration. It's all just proving that there's always going to be more and more capabilities coming down the line because we need to remember that a product team today has to build what's possible today. And by the time that they know what's possible today, it's probably like 6 or 12 months too late. So they're usually building what was capable a while ago. So what Sonnet is doing now, we won't see in the private sector for probably a year, really.
And I know your head is also very much in that sort of financial space because you're working on some projects in that area. We're really going to see some exciting things happening in health tech, another regulated industry that has a real opportunity to potentially innovate what's happening to provide more accessible care to a wider range of people who maybe don't have access to primary care in the same way. In that vein, what are some other AI implementations or companies that you're particularly excited about right now?
I wish I had an answer to that. There's a lot in the creative space. Obviously, there's a lot in contract and legal and all this kind of stuff. But in fairness, the technology isn't there yet. So I was speaking to someone who was a designer in the legal tech space, and he was saying that for their particular type of industry, the fail rate, the inaccuracies, the hallucinations, whatever you want to call them, are still too high for it to be successful and operable in what they do. So, for better or worse, right now, AI is still only delivering enough value to be worth paying for in creative or inspirational or first draft type use cases. So I hope within a year this changes, but a lot of the applications that are functional and that people are paying for are in the back end. They're data sets that a consumer doesn't see. It's been many, many years now, but let's say weather and healthcare have been leveraging AI in the background. Services that enable for scenario mapping or logistics planning, all these really, really unsexy things. And obviously, in healthcare, medical research, we're starting to leverage these things. But from a consumer's standpoint, we don't really hear about those things yet.
Yeah, that's very true. We needed the consumer excitement to make people open to the technology, but it will really be these unsexy back-end tools that drive the valuable use cases, for now at least. Thinking about all of the projects that you've worked on, conversations that you've had, and just research that you've done around emerging technology, what is one learning that's really resonated with you?
The most poignant thing that I think that we've learned thus far is that design and research are evolving. Research had always been this straight line activity where we knew where it was starting, where it was going, and we knew what we had to implement in a lot of respects. What we're learning that this technology creates is a total radical shift in this. Again, as I stated a couple of times, we need to understand why someone uses something. We understand what they might use. We need to understand what it needs to be so they do use it. Then we need to go to eval to make sure that the model is actually outputting something effective, useful, and not incorrect. And this is really transformational, this final component, because we need to go in and basically pressure test this thing constantly. And the same thing happens on the design perspective. So it creates this model where, yeah, you have this team working together, they're going to deploy this thing, but quite often the first draft of this product is absolute garbage and will not do what it needs. And at that point, you need to split the product up into specific value drivers, specific use cases, specific output types. And that is really exciting because it means that designers, researchers, writers have influence not only on the interface, but the actual underlying model and technology that it's built on. You have an impact on how outputs are structured, the quality of those outputs, the interoperability someone has in terms of how they get those things out of it. And it means that you're learning a whole new skill set. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing. And as much as this is so much fear right now from designers, researchers, and everybody, I think this is a real learning opportunity on how to go even deeper into the technology and go even higher into the mental models of people.
Well, thank you so much for going through all of this. I love this last point that you just ended on. And it's so nice to be able to go through some tangible ways to approach this work and to really think about creating real value and real use cases around AI and not just focus on the hypothetical and theoretical.
I'm excited for where we go next with these sorts of conversations because I really think that understanding the use cases is something that we're undervaluing because we're driving so much of it from intuition right now and from how businesses have been built thus far. So I'm excited to see what we learn in the next 6 to 12 months. Maybe this will change.
Thank you for listening to the Design of AI podcast. The show is hosted by Brittany Hobbs and Arpy Dragffy Guerrero. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple to get our latest episodes. We speak to leaders at the forefront of AI to learn how great AI products are designed and how they're transforming industries. To contact us, visit our website, designof.ai.